I guess it has to do with the fact that I'm a 90s kid, and I grew up loving Super Mario and Sonic, so it's not a surprise that I enjoy platformers. Would I say that I'm a hardcore platformer fan? No. At the same time, I'm a bit of a masochist when it comes to platformers because the particular subgenre of platformers that I enjoy are precise platformers. I don't remember if Super Meat Boy was the first precise platformer that I played, but what I do know is that something about these games knowing how to balance fun and difficulty keeps me coming back for more punishment. I saw Germinal on my Twitter timeline and its visuals appealed to me. I thought it'd be more of a casual styled platformer, but I was wrong. Before long, I realized that it was in fact a precise platformer, and on top of that, it featured an emotional and relatable story. The saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover," comes to mind, but sometimes it's hard to remember that. It also helped that the Twitter account that was showcasing Germinal was offering keys to reviewers. Since I saw what I liked, it was easy for me to decide to play it. Besides being impressed with the visuals from the start, I also liked how the tutorial didn't feel like one at all. It felt natural and the controls felt intuitive. That's important because it's a good way of easing you into what's to come, but at the same time, if you've got the basics down and they're easy to take in, you should eventually be able to build upon that to pull off more complex moves. With how Germinal was, that ended up being true and then some. I say that because Germinal is a kind of game that frequently changed things up. Not only were there different backgrounds, but the mechanics would change depending on which area you happen to be in. Rather than simply relying on your use of a makeshift jetpack to get you through the entirety of the game, you were expected to stay on your toes. I liked how much variety there was when it came to Germinal's gameplay because that forced you to rethink about how you've been playing, and you're forced to change your playstyle. To some that may be frustrating, especially since even a lot was required of you with some of the more basic mechanics, but I managed to get through the game without getting to rage quit levels of frustration. As a result of how many mechanics there were, I wasn't sure which one would end up being my favorite. Having beaten the game, it's difficult to list them all because there were so many. That may make some think of the saying, "Jack of all trades, master of none," but that wasn't the case here. Off the top of my head, one mechanic that stood out to me involved columns that were triggered when you'd use your hover pack. This was used in all sorts of creative ways, but at its most basic, the point was to use these columns to get from point A to point B while avoiding obstacles that lead to an insta-kill. From how I described that, it might come off as frustrating, but much like in Super Meat Boy, the instant respawns made it so that I'd keep replaying difficult sections over and over again no matter how hard or long it take me to overcome an area. I'd like to be able to say that the game's mechanics are overall great, but that's not true. I thought that the wall jump kicked you too far away from the wall you jumped off of. It felt weird to me because the wall jump came off as imbalanced, and I thought it could have been tweaked so that it felt tighter/more controllable. It's possible that this was done on purpose, maybe to add to the game's difficulty, but if that's true, it felt unnecessary. Speaking of unnecessary, I thought that the death count was embarrassing to look at. It was a constant reminder of my failures, and I thought it wasn't necessary to have it viewable during gameplay. It could have been part of the menu or endgame stats. It could be that it was meant to be a sort of scoreboard to work as an incentive to keep your death count low, but seeing as how I don't know what went into making this game, I'm just shooting from the hip here. One of the reasons why I was left feeling this way about the death count was because I didn't want to hit big round numbers. The closer I got to the end of the game, the closer I got to hitting 3,000 deaths. When I realized that was a possibility, I wanted to avoid that, mainly to avoid the blow to my ego, but it eventually happened anyway. This is really more of a nitpick, but I felt that it'd be interesting to bring this up because of how the inclusion of the death count affected my psyche while playing. Alongside how much variety was featured in Germinal thanks to its number of levels and different mechanics, there was a lot to it besides the main paths required to advance through the game. There were optional areas that were harder than what was mandatory, and that reminded me of Celeste. Much like I do in other games, I decided to get involved with these optional areas and their rewards when they didn't deviate too much from the main path, or in the case of other games, quest, and if I found that I had the necessary skills to overcome them. I like to think that having beaten this game and others like it means I'm skilled at precise platformers, but sometimes it's just too much for me. Rather than potentially wasting time chasing after something that really wasn't needed to progress through the game, it was easy to move on when I felt the need to. With how I've been writing about Germinal, it's clear that I put a lot of thought into this game as I played through it. I eventually started to feel that I accomplished more when I wasn't overthinking about how to get through some of the levels. That was especially true when I managed to pull off a move I didn't know was possible. That only happened once and it was more of a fluke than due to my skills as a player, but it was still interesting to see what I was capable of, even by accident. I mentioned that I didn't hit rage quit levels of frustration with Germinal, but at the same time, a great deal of the game was challenging and sometimes aggravating to deal with. That's one of the reasons why I felt that later levels that didn't feature the jetpack were more chill/relaxing. Those areas felt like they were part of a more traditional platformer, which was a breath of fresh air after generally dealing with hard areas, but the music also helped. Despite having enjoyed Germinal, at one point I started to think that it was longer than I thought it'd be. I'd even go so far as to say that it was longer than it needed to be. That's mainly because some parts could have been left out of the main story and been used for after you've beaten it. I wouldn't say that it felt like an artificial way to boost the game's playtime, but some of the fat definitely could have been trimmed off without affecting the game's quality. If anything, a tighter experience most likely would have left me thinking more highly of it. It helps that some of the harder parts that offer a bonus were optional, but even when ignoring them, there was still a lot to overcome due to what was expected of you. For example, there was one level that took me nearly an hour to get through. It's not as bad as some boss fights I've previously dealt with in some Soulsborne games, but it was still more than I thought I'd deal with. This happened mainly because figuring out how to approach certain levels required a lot of thought and precise movements. Germinal offers a lot of room for different playstyles to be utilized, so there really isn't one exact way of getting through each of the levels, but even when you'd find a path that fit your playstyle, actually nailing the landing was easier said than done. As I briefly hinted at before, I found the story relatable. What initially seemed like a cute-looking game with a theme turned out to be more than that. It's because a disease named Ebola is what contributes to a chunk of the story the game had to tell. It's not only because of my experiences with COVID-19 and how life has been for the past 3 years, which I'm quite certain influenced this game, but also because it's never a pleasant experience when you find out you're at fault for creating an uncomfortable situation for others. It's because for me it's sometimes easy to forget that the decisions I make or the way I live my life not only affects me, but my family and friends as well. That was explored in Germinal due to how the main character responded to dealing with what I assume was also a pandemic and stress in general. The main character created an uncomfortable situation not only for himself, but also for his partner, which eventually led to the relationship falling apart. From the start, I didn't expect all of the story that Germinal had to tell, and I was pleasantly surprised by that. Due to that and Germinal's overall gameplay, I was left thinking that this isn't just another precise platformer. There's depth to it besides playing as a character jumping around from point A to B over and over again. I enjoyed it in multiple different ways, but I also don't think it's on the same level as Garlic, another precise platformer I recently played through and plan on reviewing. Germinal delivered the precise platforming goods while keeping things fresh with new mechanics thrown in every once in a while, and it's for that reason why I recommend this game. If you're a casual platformer fan, Germinal might be too much for you, but if you enjoy challenging games that test your skills as a player, give Germinal a try. If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much for watching.